So before we begin this video, I just want to thank everyone who has watched my videos and subscribed to my channel. I obviously don't do this for the money or do this for any other reason but to explore what I do and share that with you. I just find this stuff interesting, and I'm sure other people find this stuff interesting, and I'm happy to share it. So, I appreciate you watching the videos, even though my video quality sucks sometime and my audio sucks sometime. And clearly, I have to say, the quality of YouTube videos that people produce these days is phenomenal. And I'm just recording with my phone over my workbench and going for it. So again, I want to thank everyone. Now that I've hit that 1,000 subscribers, I am giving away the prize I promised, and we'll show that in a second. I appreciate everyone watching, and I hope you continue to watch and continue to subscribe. But for today's video, I'm just going to show you a couple things. I thought I would show you my solar setup, because I never really showed that properly, and I think I'll give you a quick rundown on the solar setup. It doesn't take a lot to set up some basic solar, and solar is cheap. You just need to make sure that you point the panels in the right direction. If you're in the northern hemisphere, the panels need to point south. If you're in the southern hemisphere, the panels need to point north, so that you get the maximum sun exposure. Just a few panels, and you'll have enough to, top up a power wall. Obviously, if you want to run off the solar panels, you'll need, thousands of watts of solar. But, to just, have a power wall topped up and use it as a source of energy, just a couple panels will do you. So I'll show you my solar panels. And I'm also going to show you some tools that I use regularly. Not tools, but electronic components and some gizmos that I use a lot when working with my batteries. And they're the kind of things that you probably will need if you want to mess with power walls and, mess with e-bikes and lithium ion and that. You probably will need some of these things. And so I'll show you those, and we'll go from there. But again, thanks to everyone who's watched, and hopefully we'll keep the content going. Okay, it's time to pick a winner. I have loaded the YouTube video into this random website, pickawinner.co. And there were 13 comments on my giveaway website, or giveaway video, so let's pick a winner. Janik W. Janik W is the winner, and so I will get a hold of Janik W, and we will see if we can get the prize out to Janik. So congratulations, Janik. So here is an overview of my solar system. I have 400-watt new power panels, all wired in series. So that's actually pushing about 70 volts at 5 amps. They're wired in series. And let me show you over here. I am not using MC5 connectors. I am using heat shrink bullet connectors, and that's mainly because I actually couldn't fit the MC5 connectors through the frame against the wall there, so I actually switched to bullet connectors, the heat shrink kind, and they're pretty watertight, and I've had no problems with them. The wiring over here, believe it or not, is actually a 12 gauge speaker wire. That's actually copper clad aluminum. 12 gauge speaker wire in a PVC jacket. Now it's definitely not outdoor rated, but so far so good. I've had no problems with the PVC. I have bought outdoor low voltage wiring that is pure oxygen free copper, but I haven't bothered to replace it yet since I'm only pushing 400 watts through this wire, and I've had very little problems carrying the current and voltage on this speaker wire. I have tested what kind of voltage loss I'm getting, and I'm losing about 3 volts going from the inside to the outside, or from the outside to the inside. I'm losing about 3 volts at 70 volts, so it's under 5% voltage loss due to wire resistance, so I don't really have a problem with that. So like I said, this is 70 volts, 5 amps, and that runs in this wire jacket here down the wall, and then it's actually buried along the side here of the house. And here it is, and this is actually my landscaping wiring. This takes my landscaping wiring inside for the sprinkler system, and I just decided to use the same tube to bring in the solar, since it was already drilled and tapped. So that's where my solar comes inside and heads on into the garage and into the solar charge controller. There is the solar wire coming up through that breaker and into the Make Sky Blue charge controller. The Make Sky Blue charge controller is a step down charge controller, so it takes higher voltage than your pack and steps it down for your pack. That is why my 4 solar panels are in series, because that sends about I end up with about 65 volts into the Make Sky Blue, which it steps down to 30 volts for the pack. And that all of that is within the specs of the Make Sky Blue. There are some boost charge controllers that'll take the normal 15 volts that a single solar panel produces, and it'll boost it up to 24 volts or 36 volts depending on your pack size. So you need to know what your charge controller is rated for, and whether it's a boost converter or a buck converter. This is a buck converter. It's bringing the voltage down and increasing the amps. So like I said, 65, 70 volts at 5 amps goes in, and 30 volts at 10 amps comes out and goes into the pack. I upgraded to these marine breakers, and I don't think I mentioned this, but I upgraded to these marine breakers a while ago, and these have been perfect. I've had no problems with these. I went through many different breakers, probably 6 or 7 different breaker designs, and the problem is, honestly, I'm using the breakers as the switch, and these breakers really do not like breaking repeatedly sort of the voltage and amps that go through the system. So even though they're rated for 100 amps or 200 amps or whatever they're rated for, I think when you use them as a switch, they start to fail over time. So I messed up 6 or 7 different designs of breakers, but I ended up on these marine breakers, and so far they've been great. And these are actually, before anybody else, these are actually rated for up to 48 volts. They're actually rated for up to 48 volts. So they've been working great. Unfortunately, my OCD is a little, kicks in a little bit, because the larger breaker is actually a different size than the smaller breaker. The solar breaker is a different, this is smaller in size than this. And I kind of don't like having mismatched size breakers, but, what can you do? At this point, they work, and I'm happy with them, so I'm going to go with it. So I want to talk about some of the tools that are needed when you are messing around with batteries and power walls and e-bikes and that. And there's a few things that are really helpful. One of the most important is a source of voltage. And what I mean is, when you go to charge your batteries, when you're balancing your batteries, when you're testing your batteries, you are going to need a source of voltage. And, you know, if you're building a 7S pack, you're going to need a 29.4 voltage source in order to be able to charge it up. And so, you know, I have a bunch of these power bricks in different voltages. This is actually 54.6, which means this is actually a 13S. This is 29.4, so this is a 7S. This is what I use on my powerwall, 7S. This I use on my e-bike. But you know, you are going to need an exact voltage source based on the size of your lithium-ion batteries. Now, there's a few problems with these. Is they are only limited to a couple amps. This one is literally, I think, 2 amps. Yep, 2 amps. This might be 3 amps. It is 3 amps, but you know, those things are fine for like charging an e-bike, but forget about charging a powerwall with something like that. So, and instead of spending a bunch of money on these power bricks, because you're going to need them in variable sizes, they are convenient. These are cool to just like plug in your e-bike on, you know, when you get home and charge them. But for power walls and that, I think I wouldn't spend money on those power bricks. I would get a variable power supply. This variable power supply cost me, I think, $32 off Banggood. And you just dial in whatever voltage you want, and it outputs it. And I think it puts it out, I think this is good for 500 watts, which means, you know, this will do 10 amps easily for my Powerwall. So you just dial in the voltage you need, and these are dual outputs. Well, I wired in these dual outputs. But this will give, you know, this is a good source of amps, and you have variable voltage for whether you're working on a 7S or a 13S or a 14S, this can handle it. So I think instead of buying a bunch of power bricks, you know, these power bricks are about $15 a piece. So 2 of those power bricks and you can already pay for one of these variable voltage supplies. So I would look into one of these variable voltage supplies. They're very handy to have. Now, one problem that I seem to run into a lot is all my power supplies, you know, I always use XT60 connectors on all my things, and I always find myself having, you know, a male when I need a female or a female when I need a male. I never seem to have the right XT60 connector on my, you know, power supplies or on my battery or on my test equipment. I always seem to have the wrong XT60. So you can see on this one, I actually wired in a male and a female, so that I would have options depending on whether I needed power for a male or a female. But I also went and did one other thing, is I built an extension cable with dual outputs, male and female, and these are just you know, common together onto the negative and onto the positive. So this way, no matter which, you know, whether I need a male or a female to connect to a male or a female, it doesn't matter. This extension cable can do it, and I built it with fairly solid gauge wire. I think this is 10 gauge. So I can push, you know, 10, 20 amps, whatever equipment I'm working on, this extension cable can handle it. So I think if you're doing a lot of batteries, a lot of Powerwall, a lot of messing around, something like this should be in your arsenal. I love that I built this. I use it quite a lot, because I do tend to immediately cut off the ends of most of my power supplies and put XT60 connectors on, cut off all the barrel connectors and put on XT60s. And then, like I said, it's handy to have a conversion extension cord. Another thing that you are probably going to need is a voltmeter, a multimeter, but not just any multimeter. I suggest you get a DC clamp-on meter, like this one is. And unfortunately, DC clamp-on meters are the most expensive of the multimeters. But this one I think I got for around $35. But that's about as cheap as they get for DC clamp-on meters. You will see a lot of clamp-on meters on Amazon and eBay and that, but they are AC clamp-on meters, and we want DC clamp-on meters. Now, why do we want a DC clamp-on meter? Well, because everything we're doing is high amps. You know, these powerwalls are pushing 100 amps. A normal multimeter through these leads can only measure up to 10 amps. Okay, and there is actually a 10 amp fuse in most multimeters. So you will not be able to measure how much current you are pushing through your e-bike, your Powerwall, whatever it is, with a normal multimeter. A clamp-on multimeter that's DC will allow you to accurately measure how many amps you're consuming. Obviously, it's great if you have, like a shunt meter and some other things. There's other ways to measure the high amperage that we're pushing. But these DC clamp-on meters are very convenient, and like I said, $35, and it's a regular multimeter, but then you can also clamp onto your lead and measure your amps at any point. And then lastly, let's talk about these. These are RC chargers, and this is an ISDT. This is the toolkit RC. But this is one of the main reasons I build my Powerwall at 7S, because RC chargers support up to 8S. And, because my Powerwall is 7S, I can use these RC chargers to do whatever I need to. I can charge, balance, check the packs, anything I need to do, these kind of things can do it. If I had a 48 volt pack, there would be no convenient way for me to balance the pack, to monitor the pack or do anything really with that pack, because, the RC programmers and that just don't simply go up to 14S. I would have to rely 100% on my BMS or I'd have to spend a lot of money on some of those computer BMSs where you have a laptop plugged in, which I simply, can't justify spending more money on the BMS than the battery pack. So, I'm talking about those Watchman systems. They are awesome and cool, but literally they cost $600, and my battery pack cost $500. So, I have relied heavily from the beginning on these RC chargers, and they've done me well. I recently picked up this RC toolkit. It's interesting. It's got a very weird interface, I have to say. Let's plug it up here. Make sure it takes up to 30 volts, so I got to make sure that I'm giving it the right voltage here. Can you see that? Yeah, you can. I have to say, it is not an intuitive interface. To balance, you actually go to this measurer screen, and then you click on battery, and then it'll show you the battery that's plugged in. That'll be all your balance voltage, and then you go down to here to balance, and then it'll balance. But, honestly, it took me like 10 minutes of playing around to figure out where the balance feature was. It does have cool features, and in fact, let me plug it up to my Powerwall, and we'll poke around a little more on it. But the nice thing is that it supports 300 watts, so I can use this to balance and charge and bring batteries up to voltage. And 300 watts is quite a lot of current. And this wasn't that expensive, maybe $50, $60. But this interface is weird, I have to say. It's just not intuitive. But it does do what it says it can do, but this is one of those things you might have to read the manual on, because you probably won't get there without a bit of assistance in understanding the interface, which is a shame, because the ISDTs, their interfaces are amazingly simple and they just work the way you think they should work. This interface really actually turned me off for a minute on it, but I've sort of figured out where the things are that I need to do, and let me hook it up and I'll show you around a little more. By the way, another thing that's really useful is a good set of croc clamps on an XT60. You can see I have this XT60 coming out of the the RC, the toolkit RC, and that goes up to a set of black and red croc clamps. By the way, make sure you buy your own croc clamps and solder them yourselves. When you buy croc clamps, they are usually terrible quality. The soldering is terrible. The wire they use on them is terrible. So, I suggest you just make your own croc clamps, buy a pack of croc clamps, get some decent wire. This is like, 16 gauge. And then, sort of solder it up yourself, because a decent set of croc clamps is really helpful. So let me show you around this thing. Okay, so I have, I haven't plugged in my balance leads. Oh, let me get the polarity right on my balance leads. Every one of these RC chargers likes their balance leads. They tend to like the polarity a different way, so make sure you plug those in right. All right, so let's go to measure here. Press battery, okay. And now you can see that there are the pack voltages. There is a couple packs which are low. As usual, it's pack 2, the one I fixed twice before. It's the lowest, so I probably will run a balance on here. And like I said, to do a balance, you bring it down to balance here. Click OK, and then it starts balancing, and it determines which cells it's going to, it needs to balance, and then it starts working on them. But let me exit for a second. So that's where balance is under there. If I back this up. Charger, lithium ion, 4.15. And then, I can set the, if I want to discharge, storage charge, what kind of, how many amps I want to push, what voltage I want to balance it at, things like that. So that's your charging screen. Let's back that up. This output it's kind of like a power supply. I can set how many volts. I can set how many how many volts I want to and amps I want to push. So it's kind of like a mini power supply. It's useful, but that's why I have the variable power supply instead. And then it's got this PWM and PPM. Those are for like servos and other things testing for RC, so those don't really apply to us. And then here's the basic settings, but just sort of some basic things that you're probably never going to mess with. We don't care about our lowest input, or how much power we have, or safe temps and stuff like that. Those we're not going to use this to monitor those kind of things, so no need to mess with the settings. So mainly this is a good charger and balancer. That's the main thing you're going to use it for. But it's higher wattage, which is the nice thing. Again, 300 watts is quite a lot of watts to use, and I believe the balance is pretty solid. I think it's something like might be an amp and a half, which is really good for balancing. So we'll set that on balance and let that balance, and let it do its thing. Okay, about 15 hours later, the balance is complete. Let's see what these look like. Pretty reasonable, all within about 0.01 volts. So there we go. That's why I like to use these kind of devices, because I can just externally balance up the power wall as needed. Yeah, so that's it. Thanks for watching.